The hall was alive with the murmur of guests, yet she felt as though she sat alone in a world carved from silence. Candles burned low in their holders, dripping wax like the passage of time, and the fragrance of roses thickened the air until it was suffocating. She sat on the embroidered cushion, her back straight as custom demanded, but her trembling hands betrayed the storm inside her. The veil clung to her face like a prison wall, hiding her expression, but not her shame. She could feel eyes on her, curious, judgmental, pitying. They saw only the rumors, the scars of her past that clung like shadows. She lowered her head further, wishing she could dissolve into the marble floor beneath her feet. Her heart pounded painfully as she listened to the shuffle of his footsteps drawing closer. He was the man she had been promised to, a stranger in every way that mattered, and yet tonight, fate tied their lives together. She had prayed he would never truly look at her. If he did, if he saw what she had hidden beneath silks and veils, she feared he would recoil just as others had. The thought burned through her chest until it hurt to breathe. The room grew quiet as he stopped before her. The weight of that silence pressed harder than all the whispers. He didn't speak, and the pause stretched so long she thought her shame had already confirmed everything he suspected. Her fingers twisted tighter into the fabric of her dress. She felt small, fragile, ready to crumble under the weight of expectation. Then she felt it, a touch, not of command, but of care. His hand rose slowly, brushing against the delicate fabric of her veil. He didn't pull it away abruptly, as though unveiling a secret to be judged, but instead lifted it with gentleness, as if he feared harming her with even that small motion. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she shut her eyes tightly, bracing for the sting of disappointment she was certain would follow. The veil slipped away, falling back to reveal the truth of her face. The flickering candlelight touched her skin, illuminating features she had long learned to hide. She felt naked beneath his gaze, stripped of protection, her soul bared in that single instant. She wanted to turn away, to cover herself again, to escape the verdict she believed would come. But his voice broke the stillness, low and steady, carrying none of the cruelty she had feared. "You're beautiful." Her eyes flew open, stunned by the words. She searched his face, desperate to find the mockery she was certain must linger beneath them. But his eyes were steady, filled not with pity or disapproval, but with a sincerity that disarmed her. He was not looking at her scars, nor at the broken pieces of her past. He was looking at her, truly seeing her, as though she were the only person in the room. The tension in her chest loosened, just a little. Her lips trembled, unable to form a reply, yet the tears that burned at the corners of her eyes betrayed the storm of emotions within her. She had imagined this moment countless times in her dread, but never had she imagined it like this, soft, kind, carrying the power not to break her, but to lift her from the shadows she had been buried under for so long. Around them, the hall seemed to fade into nothingness. The guests, the whispers, even the solemn priest standing nearby, all blurred into the background. The world narrowed until it was only the two of them, bound together not by tradition or expectation, but by the quiet promise in his words. He hadn't declared it loudly for others to hear. He had spoken softly, so only she could carry it in her heart. Her breath shuddered as she lowered her gaze again, but this time, not out of shame. She was overwhelmed, uncertain of how to hold this fragile kindness being handed to her. For so long she had believed herself unworthy of such words, unworthy of being cherished. And yet, here they were, spoken without hesitation, offered like a gift. When she dared to look up again, his expression hadn't changed. His hand, the one that had lifted her veil, lingered in the air between them, as though waiting for her to accept the bridge he had offered. She hesitated, her heart caught between fear and yearning. Then, slowly, with a trembling courage, she let her hand rise. Her fingertips brushed his, so lightly it was almost not a touch at all, but the contact sent warmth flooding into her. In that moment, she realized that perhaps beauty was not only in flawless skin or a perfect past. Perhaps beauty was in the way someone chose to see you, not for your flaws, but for the strength it had taken to endure them. His words had not erased her pain, but they had cracked open a door she had long sealed shut, the door to hope. The ceremony continued, though she hardly heard the vows. Her mind lingered on that single sentence, echoing within her like a melody she didn't know she had been waiting for. Each time she replayed it in her thoughts, it carried her a little higher, away from the heavy chains of shame. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life not defined by what she had suffered, but by the possibility of what could be built anew. When the vows were sealed and the hall erupted in applause, she remained lost in the quiet world between them. Her hand still rested in his, her heart beating not in fear, but in something tender and unfamiliar, trust. As they rose together, she caught his gaze once more, and the corners of his lips lifted in the faintest smile. It was not the smile of a man who pitied her, nor of one who wore a mask for the crowd. It was a smile meant for her alone, a silent reassurance that his words had not been fleeting. She lowered her eyes once more, but this time with a softness she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she believed the possibility that she was not a burden, not a mistake. For the first time, she let herself believe she was beautiful. And with that belief, however fragile, she stepped into her new life, not alone, but with the warmth of a man who had chosen to see her not as the world did, but as she longed to be seen. The hall shimmered with light from 100 flickering candles, their glow catching on polished brass lanterns and gilded edges of carved wood. The air was heavy with the perfume of roses, jasmine, and marigolds, a sweetness that clung to every breath. Guests shifted in hushed silence, their whispers darting like shadows from corner to corner. She sat at the center of it all, but her heart felt locked away in a world apart, drowning beneath the weight of expectation and shame. Her hands shook despite her best efforts to steady them. The silk of her gown, pale and shimmering, gathered beneath her fingers as she twisted it tight in her lap. The veil fell low over her face, merciful in its concealment, yet suffocating too, for it reminded her that she had something to hide. Her chest ached from the strain of holding her breath, of listening to the rise and fall of gossip that clung like smoke to the walls around her. They said she was unworthy. They said she carried scars. Scars not always of the flesh but of choices, of stories whispered until they had become truth in everyone's eyes. She sat there, her chin tucked low, trying to fold herself into invisibility. The sound of footsteps drew near, echoing against the marble floor. Each step pressed harder against her chest until she thought her ribs might break. This was the man she had been bound to, a stranger in many ways, though his presence now felt larger than life. She wanted desperately to disappear, to hide behind the veil forever, for she feared what his eyes might say once they saw her fully. Silence fell deeper as he stopped in front of her. It was not the silence of peace, but of anticipation, of 1,000 hearts straining to witness what would come next. She felt it pressing down on her like a judgment passed without trial. She clutched her hands tighter, wishing she could flee, but duty anchored her to the cushion beneath her. Then came the shift of air, the faint movement of his hand. She stiffened, her pulse quickening as she sensed him reaching for the veil. Her breath caught painfully. No, she thought, please don't look. She braced herself, every nerve in her body taut with the memory of rejection, the sting of turned faces, the echo of cruel laughter. She shut her eyes, preparing for the inevitable. The veil lifted, not in haste, not in demand, but slowly, carefully, as if he understood the fragility of the moment. The fabric whispered against her skin as it fell back, exposing the truth of her face to the candlelight. She felt naked, exposed, her shame laid bare before him in the sea of unseen eyes. Her throat tightened with panic. She longed to hide her face in her hands, to run before his silence turned into something cruel. But then he spoke. You're beautiful. The words were soft, almost reverent, as if spoken to no one but her. Her eyes flew open, startled by the unexpected kindness. She searched his face with a desperate urgency, certain she would find mockery or pity there, but there was none. His gaze was steady, warm, and unshaken. He looked at her not as if she were broken, not as though she were something to be endured, but as though she were something precious, something rare. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The hall around them faded to a blur, the murmurs of guests dissolved into silence, and all that remained was the echo of his words in her chest. She wanted to believe him, but disbelief warred with hope, clashing so fiercely inside her it brought tears to her eyes. She lowered her gaze quickly, trembling, afraid he might see too much of the longing in her expression. Yet the shame that had always weighed on her seemed suddenly lighter, as though his words had loosened chains she had carried for far too long. She felt his hand still hovering between them, not pressing, not demanding, simply there. An offering. Her heart pounded wildly as she hesitated. The old fear whispered that if she reached out, she would be betrayed again, cast aside. But another voice, smaller and trembling, told her this was different. Slowly, hesitantly, her fingers lifted, brushing his hand with the lightest touch. His palm met hers, warm and steady, grounding her in a way she hadn't thought possible. The hall stirred faintly, but neither of them moved. In that shared moment, she felt seen, not as the world had painted her, not as a story told in whispers, but as herself. His words had carved a space of safety around her, fragile yet powerful, where shame could not reach. The ceremony continued, though her ears barely caught the vows spoken around her. Her mind circled only that single sentence, turning it over and over, as though afraid it might vanish if she did not hold it tightly enough. "You're beautiful." 3 simple words, but they shifted the ground beneath her feet. They told her she was more than her scars, more than her past, more than the cruel judgments of others. When the priest declared them bound, the hall erupted with clapping and calls of blessing, but she heard it all as if from a great distance. Her hand remained in his, her pulse racing, her heart trembling with something new, something close to hope. She dared to lift her eyes again, meeting his gaze. He was smiling, not broadly, not for show, but a soft, private smile meant only for her. A reassurance, a promise. Her lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Instead, her eyes filled with tears that slipped silently down her cheeks. For the first time, she did not wipe them away in shame. They were not the tears of rejection, but of release, of something inside her breaking open to the possibility of healing. As they rose together, she walked at his side not as a prisoner of fate but as someone who had been given a new beginning. The whispers of the crowd still lingered at the edges of the hall, but they no longer carried the same power. His words had drowned them out. When she lowered her gaze again, it was not in fear but in humility, in wonder that she might be worthy of such gentleness. For years she had carried the belief that she was unlovable, unworthy of kindness. But tonight, with a single sentence, he had begun to unravel that lie. Tonight, she stepped forward not into a life defined by shame, but into the fragile, luminous hope that perhaps she truly was beautiful.